Hello students, welcome back to the next phase of our set of tutorials for 3D Studio Max. In the previous lab you worked at length with the different primitives, basic shapes that were available to create in our viewport. So today we're going to take it a step further and we are going to learn how to actually make changes to our primitive objects and begin to sculpt some geometry that resembles something from real life. So generally when we do this, we start with an object that we can build off of. So I'm going to 3D model a fork, a simple fork, and like I've said time and time again, there's more than one way to do this, and the way I do it is to start with a box. So I'm going to create it in the front viewport so that I can see it, and this does not look like much for the moment, but you will see in a second. So I am going to make sure that my box is at the origin, 0, 0, 0, just in case. And we can probably see when we look at it from the front here that there are 4 lines here. Now the reason for that is because I had made a change before. Most of the shapes you guys were working with last time around, we didn't work with our segments. But what our segments actually do for us is allow us to add additional detail to our 3D objects. So in this case, I'm adding 4 segments because one of the first things I'm going to do is change my there we go. I changed it to default shading with edged faces. So you can see now, not only do I have my surface, but I also have my lines like that. So anyhow, back to 4 facets here. Why is that? Well, the fork has 4 prongs. So this is where we're going to begin. So just to introduce you to what's called the Modify tab. It's the next tab over in our Control Center. And this is where a lot of the magic happens, so to speak. So we have our box selected. We can go into the list of modifiers, and there are tons of these, but there's just a couple we're going to focus on today. This is one of the most powerful modifiers in the software, the Edit Poly modifier. And when we put that onto an object, it allows us to make all sorts of changes to that object. So we can see here that it gives us a few different options, and let's start with vertices. We see when we click on these little dots we get the individual vertices that make up our object, and incidentally if we have the move tool selected and we click on a vertex, we can actually click and drag and move it around. So all of a sudden that adds some changes to our shape. Likewise with the edge tool selected, you can grab an edge of your shape and move it as well. You can also select multiple edges in a row by holding Shift, and it'll find hi. So you can use the Shift key to select a whole row of lines, and you can edit those too. Now while I'm dragging this up and down, I just want you to look. This is where the 4 viewports are really useful. So I'm looking at this object from the side. I can see how what I'm doing impacts the shape from the side versus looking down. It didn't change it at all because I was only moving things in the X or the Z direction. And from the front, we can see now that that edge is higher than the other. So I'm going to Control Z again to undo, and we're going to move on. I'm going to skip this guy for now because it doesn't apply yet. If I clicked Select by Polygon, I can select the individual faces of my object and move them as well, so that can produce some interesting results. And last but not least, this is going to select the entire polygon. So if you select a face and you decide you don't want to select it anymore, you can click outside it to clear it, or you can click a neighboring polygon and clear it that way. Alright, so those are the 4 ways to select things. So for making our fork, we're going to use the polygon selection mode, and we are going to use the Shift key, the Control key. Control key lets you select whatever vertices you want in all different orders. The Shift key makes you use all in the same row. Okay, 1 vertex at a time using the Control key. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to make our fork, whatever they call them, the little sticky things on the fork. So I'm going to drag, go down, go down, go down until we find the Edit Polygons menu. This is where all the good stuff is. So we could do a few things, but what I'm going to show you is first the bevel, or first the inset tool. And when you click this little settings thingy, you get this little menu here. And if we drag down, or if we drag up, sorry, it's going to see how it's sort of creating another set of faces within the other faces. Now that's not totally what we want. We want each individual one to have its own instead of them being shrunken as a unit. So what we can do is click this guy and we can say by polygon. So now you can see we have each little face now is inside there. So then we can use what's called the extrude, and what the extrude does is stretches it out. So this is where having multiple viewports is useful. So I can quickly look at the top view and say, yeah, that looks about right. I like that, and I'm going to click the check mark to save it. So let's zoom out and let's take a look. So part one of our fork is done. So we're going to go back and we are going to select, again, by holding Shift. And actually I have the Move tool on. That might confuse some people. You can just use the straight Select Object tool, and that way you don't run the risk of moving anything by accident. So I've selected all those guys. Now one thing that can happen when you're doing this is if you accidentally are clicking, sometimes you can click and a polygon on the bottom will accidentally get selected because the computer gets confused. So a way to prevent that from happening is to go up here and click Ignore Back Facing. And what that means is it won't select a polygon on the other side when you're clicking. So it ensures that it will only click on the one that you're clicking and not click on something back here by accident. All right, so let's see. A few different ways for how we could do this, but I'm going to recommend we do one more extrude, but that's a little too far, so let's shorten it up. And what I'm basically doing here is just kind of getting a basic fork shape, if you will. So the reason I did 2 there is because I'm going to use the scale tool, and I'm going to go in the X direction, and I'm going to shrink it down there. So see how it's starting to kind of look like a fork a little bit. And then I'm going to use the extrude one more time to extrude out that handle. And that's decent. I'm not going Pixar quality here, but so you can see that just with a few simple tools, mainly the extrude and the inset tool, we were able to take a box and build off of it and make a basic square shape, so or a basic fork shape. So next modifier we're going to apply is another very useful modifier called the Turbosmooth. So check this out. So once we hit Turbosmooth, our fork starts to look a little bit more like a fork. But there's still some stuff we could do to make it a little more realistic. So I'm going to turn off that modifier, and I did that by clicking on the eyeball, and then click back on the Edit Poly to continue to make some fine-tuned adjustments. So one thing that we could do is we could, if we select the front of the fork, and oh look, it only selected part of it. And that's because I had this turned on. There are some situations where you want to be able to select all of the different polygons under your selection tool. There's other times you only want the ones facing you. So depending on if you want the ones facing you or all of the ones behind what you're selecting, this may be on or off. So I'm going to use the rotation tool. I'm going to rotate this a little bit. And it looks a little weird, but bear with me here. I'm going to... So now our fork has a little bend to it, which is a little more realistic. Another thing that we could do here is I could actually use the vertex selection. Oops, moved it by accident. Hold down Shift. Gotta zoom in. Actually, I think this is where the loop would come in handy. Nope. Sometimes you'll find that right here, once you start getting into this, sometimes some of this stuff doesn't do exactly what you expect it to. There you go. So I managed to select that entire loop right there, and what I'm going to do is just narrow it a little bit to make that fork have a little more shape to it. Okay, and oop, that's the bell. And then last but not least, I'm going to put a little end on the fork. And I'm going to turn off the scale tool. I'm going to use the bevel for this. And I'll move this over here so you can see what it's doing. Comes out a little bit. And then kind of gives that a little edge. And I click check to finish it off. Alright, so now that I've added a little more detail to my fork, I'm going to come over here and turn that off. And then turn Turbosmooth back on. And our fork is continuing to look more and more like a real fork. So I'm going to stop there. Alright, so that is some basics on how to use the Edit Poly modifier with a simple, starting with a simple box and modeling a fork. That's it.